Welcome everybody for coming along to our How Can I Help Supporting Farmer Wellbeing for Service Providers webinar. So hope you can see me all right there. My name is Helen Chenoweth. I work with Agriculture Victoria, and I'm very pleased to be able to start off the webinar today. We've got an hour that's pretty well packed with Kelly Barnes, who's also from the National Centre for Farmer Health, who's going to be running through quite a lot of good information, good tips, good tricks, and also some life experiences, I gather, Kelly, from your experience, supporting farmers, supporting people in various situations. In this particular case, we've obviously got the dry seasons, drought conditions going on. And unfortunately, we also just had recently, as we all know, some fire activities in the state, which hasn't been great. So there certainly is higher levels of angst and probably stress for a number of our clients and people that we're dealing with. And it's always a great opportunity to come together. In this case, it won't be face-to-face, but webinars work very well. You guys are having your sandwich or your cup of tea at the moment, which is great, over lunch. So it's a great opportunity to spend a little bit of time just reflecting on some of the supports and some of the ideas that we can use as we're going out across the kitchen table, across the ute bonnet, talking to our clients, and maybe sometimes picking up some issues with that as well. So it's fantastic to have you along. There'll be more coming as we talk. It is going to be recorded, so for people that have been registered, you'll certainly be able to access this information at a later date. I'll also be sending out further information and links as we go as well, so that you'll have all that information at the tip top of your hands, and in terms of resources that are available and places to go if you do need to look for some more information. But basically, National Centre for Farmer Health have been engaged to provide this webinar as part of a big package of over $13 million that the government has put together, state government's put together. I'll be getting more information out to you as well. But just some reminders for that some of that is also some one-to-one consultations with a farm advisor, which is free and available for farmers. And there's also a range of other boosted programs for farmers that are being run by a number of different organisations right across the state. And of course, there's also on-farm infrastructure grants that are still available as well for $5,000 with co-contributions. So I just wanted to run through that very early stage of information for you. I'll just see Sarah Moncrief. Are you available, Sarah, at this stage to talk a little bit about rural financial counselling service?
Sarah Moncrief, Rural Financial Counselling Service. We cover the western side of Victoria, so obviously in the thick of green drought at the moment, and now heavily impacted by current and recent fires going on. So in short, I'm not going to take up too much time because I'm going to pop some literature into the chat that people can read, but we're out there on the ground and can provide face-to-face assistance on farm, both in the financial counselling space for farmers, primary producers, but also small businesses in the communities that have been impacted in recent times. So we've been heavily involved in assisting people applying for the drought grants that Helen just spoke of. Also, there's other government support out there that we can assist people with as well, which can be farm household allowance. And there's some disaster recovery payments through Services Australia, aka Centrelink as well. So out there on the ground, free, confidential, face-to-face support in a financial sense. We all can also provide that same support in a wellbeing sense as well. And I think at the moment, look, I've just seen the referrals coming through this morning, particularly in around the fire areas, and the impact is huge. And yeah, we're getting a lot of new people coming through the door, which is great that they know where to come to. So we'll be able to supply them or provide them with face-to-face wellbeing support as well as financial support. Side note, coming up in early February, on the 12th and 14th of February, we've got two events coming up, one in Inverleigh and one in Mortlake. And what they are, they're sessions called Talk the Talk, and they're designed for service providers. They're 2-hour sessions, and they're designed to give service providers the skills to be able to recognise mental health issues or wellbeing issues in their clients or in the people that they come across in their communities, and also give service providers some really practical skills and strategies in how to raise a conversation with someone who they suspect might be going through a tough time, and then what to do when that person, or if that person does open up to you as well. I think it's a really important thing to be able to do in our roles as service providers, or as, just good community members living in rural communities, keeping an eye out for your neighbour, your mate down the road, someone at the footy club, however that may look. Having those skills to be able to recognise when someone's not coping and what to do about it is really important. And I think having those skills in the community just builds stronger communities. And it does help your neighbour and the person down the road and the person around the corner. So they're 2 free events that are coming up, the 12th and 14th of February in Mortlake and Inverleigh. I'll pop the brochures in the chat. There's a QR code that you can scan on and register to attend those events. They are capped events, only because the sensitive nature that we do speak of in those events, or throughout the content. But I do know that there's certainly still some spots available to attend that if you'd like to get face-to-face, training in person in how to have those tough conversations.
Thanks, Sarah. Fantastic. Thank you for your time as well. It's been wonderful to have you in, even though you've been in and out. We understand that. And we'll make sure that information gets through, both through the chat, but also on a follow-through email for everybody that's registered as well. Thanks, Sarah.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you all so much for having me speak.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Bye.
All the best. Thank you. So fantastic to have Sarah involved, and all the crew right across the state that do such a wonderful job for supporting farmers. So Kelly, now it's your chance to shine. It's a packed program, so questions, and particularly if you do have burning questions, look, certainly whack them in the chat. I mightn't be able to have time to actually chase them up today, but certainly there'll be information that will be available for any information that you are looking forward to following up through in the emails to come. So thanks, Kelly, for your time, and press your buttons and see how we go.
Excellent. Thanks, Helen. And we will send out a survey at the end. So if there is any burning questions or anything that you've missed or want some more information on, you can always pop that on the end of the survey as well, and we'll be able to get back to you. First of all, just before we start, I'd just like to do acknowledgement of country. So as we all gather here virtually for this meeting, I just want to take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place and recognise the various traditional lands that we all dial in from today. I'm based today in Hamilton, which is Gunditjmara country, and this is an area particularly rich in agricultural heritage going back thousands of years. So we always like to acknowledge that, and we'd just like to acknowledge the elders past and present of the lands that we all work and live on, and their ancestral spirits with gratitude and respect. Feel free to pop in the chat if you'd like where you're dialing in from today as well. So just a bit of an introduction from me. I'm a research assistant here at the National Centre for Farmer Health. I have an ag background, so a little bit different to a lot of people that I work with from the health background. I grew up on a farm in the south of England, and then studied animal science and worked on farm, worked in shearing sheds here in New Zealand, and then moved across into rural merchandise roles. So I've done lots of different bits and pieces, lived and worked in different various communities here and New Zealand and the UK. And then I came on board at the centre full-time nearly 3 years ago, mostly working in the mental health space, working on resilience, community resilience, lots of different kind of wellbeing projects in that space, and delivering workshops, which is really nice to get out and about and get out and see people face-to-face and online as well. Perfect. So I'll just pop some slides up. Please yell out if at any point you can't see the slides or anything, but they should all work perfectly, hopefully. So this is really a kind of, I want to acknowledge, working in this space, you do have a lot of support and do a lot to help your clients, but also I really want to focus partly on supporting yourselves as well, because it can be really, really challenging working in these spaces and looking after yourself. Also acknowledging that people often work in lots of different spaces in the rural communities. So it's about how you can support your farmers, but also I think really focusing on supporting yourselves as well. So just a brief piece about the centre. We've recently changed our vision and strategic plan. So we're aiming to shape tomorrow's healthiest farming communities worldwide. Eventually, big picture. So we're guided by evidence. We influence positive change for health, wellbeing and safety in agriculture and foster transformative action on farms. So we have these 3 pillars. We're a partnership between Western District Health Service and Deakin University. So we've kind of got the research arm and the service delivery arm. And so together we gather evidence. We're always measuring and evaluating what we're doing. We will lobby for things. We will try and educate industry and then also deliver services on the ground. So it's quite a nice, different 3-pronged approach. So I guess firstly, when the thing to start with is what is well-being. So I quite like the term well-being. I think it's well-being kind of encompasses everything, not just mental health, but we all know physical health can really affect our mental health and vice versa. A really nice definition that's come up from some research is that it's this really nice balance between your resources and your challenges. So obviously without any challenge at all, we kind of need something to give us a bit of a drive and a bit of a push and keep us going, and that's how we grow and how we learn. So we need some degree of challenge, but we also need to be able to balance that with resources. So in the 3 pillars they've identified are psychological, social and physical factors, and that's both resources and challenges. So as a bit of an example to kind of put it into context, when everything's going well and you've got your nice balance, you might have your psychological resources, which might be, you might unwind in the evenings with a book or watching some Netflix or, doing something relaxing at home. Socially, you might meet up with your mates at footy or netball training, doing pre-season. And you're doing a bit of physical exercise as well. So you're getting some physical exercise. You might be working outside all day. If you're an agronomist, you're probably cutting a few laps of the paddocks, doing some physical exercise. So you've got your resources. Psychological, it might be early on in the dry season. There's a bit of stress, a bit of angst happening. So there's a bit of a challenge there, but it's not too bad. Socially, there might be a few club politics at the local footy club. There might be a few issues with a new coach that's playing and coaching, but it doesn't really affect you too much. And you might have a bit of a sore back from sitting in the ute, driving around paddocks, but it's not too bad. And you're going out, you're doing your training, you're doing a few things to help ease that, and then you've been taking the dog for a walk after work to help stretch things out. So you've got some challenges. Life isn't always rosy, but you've also got your resources that are helping you there. What happens when the challenges become greater than the resources is you get this tip in the balance, you get a bit out of kilter. So that's when things start to go awry. So your dry season is continuing on, so your challenges got bigger. Not just feed now, but water's becoming an issue. So that's another thing in conversation that people are talking about. There's a lot more to think about. One of your friends in the local footy club is now involved in all these coach politics, and they're downloading on you. So that situation's amplified a little bit more, and your back's getting a bit sore. You're spending a lot more time in the ute. You're then not doing some of the other things that are balancing that out. So your challenges have got bigger. You've also finished the book you're reading. You haven't made time to start a new one. You've sort of dropped off on some of that Netflix and relax time in the evenings. You're probably thinking about work a little bit more. You've been doing a lot more hours at work, so you're finishing late. So you haven't then made your footy training or your netball training, you haven't been doing that exercise either. So your social connections reduced and your physical exercise is reduced, and the poor old dog hasn't been for a walk either. So you can see how when these resources start to drop off and the challenges start to get bigger, things get a little bit out of kilter. So that's what we're really talking about when we talk about well-being. Now, some of the work done at the centre through some of the programs has identified that there's 4 different pillars that get affected when our well-being's affected. So if there's an injury, illness, disability, that can be physical or mental. So, we often think of physical injuries like breaking a leg or breaking an arm or something like that. It's also when you're under a lot of stress or when you're struggling mentally. So the flip side to that also is that when you're in really good health, all of these things go really, really well as well. So I will talk about the impact it has when there's an injury or illness. But I do like to think about it the other way as well, that it actually impacts these 4 areas when things are going well as well. So obviously for a farmer, you've got the impact on them directly. So loss of income, pain and suffering, costs, and also time away from the farm to go and get treatment. What we know through the research is that it's actually often quite a long distance to go to specialists if something's quite serious. That can cause quite a lot of stress. Got the impact on your family. So other members of the family will take on a caring role. They may be required to drive to these services or have overnight stays and things like that in bigger cities. And there's also a burden of the farm work, and that can often usually kind of falls to immediate family members. So that can be partners and children. So quite a lot of younger children actually end up taking on some of those caring roles as well, and those farm caring roles. You've got obviously an impact on the farm, loss of key labour, animal welfare issues, and I imagine that's quite challenging this year, particularly with things like water. So constantly checking water sources and things like that. If you're getting on someone else to take on some of the work while that key person with all the knowledge is away, they also don't know the systems either. And I think about a friend of mine, they've got a really complex water system with pumps and bores and solar panels and all sorts of things. They are having a lot of trouble with sand and things getting in the pumps. But if someone else came in and they were ill or injured, no one would necessarily know how all that system works. So, and the same with health and safety with other things like operating machinery, knowing the lay of the land, where to drive, where not to drive. So it can become quite a problem on the farm. And then all of you well know these farmers are a huge part of the community as well. So you've got people on committees, particularly at the moment thinking about the fires. A hell of a lot of farmers are on CFA crews. So you lose that major labour unit to lots of other different roles within the community, and you've got reduced capacity there. And they can often be someone that other people look up to as well, sort of an influencer or a leader in their community as well. And I do think I like to add kind of service providers as a little extra one as well, because it affects you guys as well. So if the farmers are struggling or if they're injured or anything else, it does affect you within those roles as well. I'll just pop a little animation that sums this slide up.
When a farmer is unwell or is seriously injured, in addition to physical suffering, they may suffer loss of income. There can also be cost of travel and accommodation to access medical treatment, which could be some distance away. The farm family can struggle, as family members, including children, care for the farmer and are called upon to step up and keep the farm running, sometimes putting themselves at risk by tackling work or operating equipment that is beyond their ability. Livestock can also suffer if their food and animal husbandry requirements are not provided. Crops fail, and machinery and infrastructure repairs and maintenance are put off, increasing the risk of accidents to everyone on the farm. Rural communities can suffer the loss of a volunteer and leaders in key organisations, such as school councils, fire authorities, and agricultural shows, as farming men and women are pivotal to these community organisations. A small community can really suffer a measurable loss of capacity to function if a farmer becomes unwell or is seriously injured.
So it's just a bit of a brief intro. What I want you to think about in your service provider roles is also what other roles you play in your community. So we're quite aware that, you know, often you are part of this farming community, you potentially have a farm yourselves. There's a number of other different roles that you play. So here's just a few examples. I'm pretty sure you've all been asked, when's it going to rain? What's the weather going to do? So you do become a weather forecaster. You might be on things like the CFA. You're probably pointing out some slightly unsafe practices at times and things like that. I'm sure you've all been involved in a few either succession planning disagreements or debates, or you've had that kind of offloaded on you, running people around. You've obviously got families. So there's lots of other different roles and bits and pieces that you play within that community as well. So you're not, obviously you're not just seen as a person coming on farm and providing a service, but all these other bits and pieces within the community. So keeping that in mind, there's the three R's, which is from an accidental counselling course, which is normally quite common. And then I've added the fourth one because I think it's really important that while you're helping other people and recognising and responding and referring for other people, you also take time to reflect for yourselves and check in with how you're feeling, how you're going, and how you're managing that as well. So we'll do a little bit of that at the end. So the first thing that really is probably the most important thing is recognising when someone's stressed, which then leads into distress. And that's really all you need to do, kind of acknowledge and recognise when you're working with someone that things aren't quite right. So as I said, without a challenge or without stress, things can be pretty cruisy and laid back, but you actually don't get things done. So everyone needs a little bit of stress to be able to do something and kind of activate and keep going and keep moving forward. It's an increased activation of the mind and body in response to demands. So obviously some activation is really good, but it also can be quite harmful. And what we see when you're sitting in that higher state of stress, in that heightened stress for a long period of time, that's when we start to have psychological and physical challenges. So I always like to use my lovely tiger analogy. Originally, we were designed, obviously, if there was a stressor like a tiger or a lion or something chasing you, you need a bit of activation to be able to run from it. So you get this surge of hormones, you can run away, get away from the threat, and then it goes away, and then everything calms back down. This is great if you've only got 200 meters to sprint to safety, gets you up, fired up, you can sprint and get away from it. If you then say your next point of safety is about 2 kilometers away, you get fired up, you can sprint. It might be a bit slower, you've got to run a bit further. It's a bit exhausting, but you potentially get there. However, if you can't get to a safe spot for say 200 kilometers and you're having to run and try and get away from this stressor or this threat for a long period of time, that's when you start to get exhausted. You can take a long time to then recover as well. So the sort of theory behind stress is that it's that really quick, short period of time to activate you to be able to get away from immediate danger. If that ends up then becoming a prolonged period, that's when we can start to see a lot more complex challenges and a lot more health issues. So you might be able to manage something in the same with your farming clients. They might be able to manage like a short period, like a flood event, which isn't too serious. It comes, it goes, and then everything goes back to normal. But at the moment where we've had this continual dry and we've had it from, like we didn't get the break in the autumn and then it's carried on and carried on, it's that long period of stress that's really quite challenging. So that's sort of why I guess it's kind of compounding and getting more and more challenging at the moment. You don't get that relief. And also you've got other compounding things at the moment, like we're thinking about feed, but then we're also thinking about water, thinking about fires and lots of other different things that are adding to it. I'll just check, did you Were you all able to, no sound. I couldn't see the chat. Let me check that before I pop the next one on. Perfect. So I'll just pop this little animation on and it will talk through the different stresses and how lots of different stresses can become quite a big piece and add to the compounding stress that people are under.
Farming is often promoted as a serene and idyllic profession, but behind the scenes there are many constantly moving parts and silent juggles. Financial pressures weigh heavily, and farmers are at the mercy of commodity market fluctuations and supply challenges. Farm input costs are year-round, but income may only come in once or twice per year. Farming is heavily dependent on the weather. Unpredictable weather patterns including droughts, floods and extreme temperatures can disrupt schedules, diminish yields, and wipe out months of hard work. Crop and livestock diseases, pests and biosecurity concerns compound these struggles. These might be a local and seasonal disease challenge, such as fungal disease in crops due to a wet season, or they might be a national ongoing biosecurity threat, such as foot and mouth disease. A large proportion of farms are a family-run business, and there can be challenges with family and relationship dynamics, communication, and succession planning. The farm is both a home and a workplace, and the lines between the two often become blurred. Working with living things, be it cropping, horticulture or livestock, means that tasks are very time-dependent, and the workload often extends beyond the traditional 9-to-5 workday. This can leave farmers physically and mentally drained, with little time for recreation and downtime. Sourcing, managing and retaining a seasonal workforce can be tricky, and language barriers can add to the challenge. Distance to services can add a logistical challenge, for example accessing healthcare, schooling, earning an off-farm income, or sourcing farm supplies or business advisory services. We're often able to carry one or two challenges at a time, and carrying a heavy load for short periods may be okay, but it's the compounding effect of constant and multiple stresses at once that can wear us down and impact not only our livelihoods, but also our mental well-being.
Okay, so it's just a nice example, I think, of how one or two things can be okay to take, but when we've got that bigger load and there's lots of different things, it can become quite overwhelming. I did have a friend of mine test pilot these and give feedback on these animations, and she said, I've never really kind of thought of all the different things all at once that we're dealing with. So she's always kind of thinking of the odd different stresses, but never actually thought of having them all together. So it's quite a nice visual and a way to understand and see what people are trying to balance as well. So probably some of the ways to recognize that someone might be experiencing some stress, there's probably the biggest thing is it's a change in their normal behavior. So it's really kind of, once you get to know your friends or family or clients, it's seeing that change in their normal behavior. It can often be lots of different things. So it's not just one thing, but lots of different changes that can pop up. Some of the physical things might be headaches, neck and shoulder tension. So we're sort of in that fight or flight mode. Breathing can change. So rapid breathing, shortness of breath. Our digestive system tries to compensate. The blood goes to our major organs and the body actually directs blood away from the digestive system. So you can get these stomach upsets, fatigue, so that kind of burnout, low energy, brain fog. So sort of you can't quite think clearly, can't struggle to make decisions. That's something that we often see when people have got lots of complex decisions to make with sort of dry season, with feed, with following disaster recovery. Sweating, so excess sweating, and weakened immune system. So you might hear people saying, oh, like I've had every cold under the sun this year, or I don't normally get sick, but I've had a really bad, flu's been really bad, or the kids are bringing all sorts of things home from school. People will start to get lots more of those little smaller colds and bugs that they perhaps would have fought off if they were feeling much better. So that can be quite a good little sign that something's not quite right. Some of the behavioural signs, like people can be anxious or worried. It's probably worrying about things that perhaps they wouldn't normally worry about. They can get quite repetitive, so worrying about the same things. Feeling unhappy, I think depressed is a bit of a funny term, but obviously low mood, not feeling very positive, being quiet or withdrawn. I sort of always say be a bit cautious with that, because some people like to withdraw to restore. So if you're introverted, being withdrawn is actually your kind of re-energizing mode. So it's not always a sign that you're stressed. But if someone's naturally a people person, they're naturally out and about, quite chatty, and they are then quiet or withdrawn, that's probably a sign. Guilty or worthless. So a good example of that would be that if they're worried about their sheep or their cattle, and they're thinking they're a failure because their stock aren't looking very good, rather than just it being a consequence of the season. So they're sort of taking it on personally, and they might catastrophize. So all the stock are looking awful, as opposed to it just being one particular mob that's just not doing so well because of the feed. So that they're taking it on very personally. Sleep problems, so that can be either way. So you can either be sleeping too much. So if someone's normally a morning person and they're not up and about, if you've got a client that's normally on the phone really early in the morning and they're not, that might be an identifier. I'm not a morning person, so I always say if you see me out and about bright and early, there's something wrong and I can't sleep. It just depends what people's natural preferences are. So, and someone that perhaps is a morning person that's normally in bed quite early, if they're sending you emails and things late at night, that might be a sign that they're struggling and they're thinking about lots of things. Weight change or appetite change. So people will either eat more and put on weight, or they will eat less and lose weight potentially if they're feeling stressed or struggling. Substance abuse. So this can include alcohol, so either prescription medications, painkillers, illegal drugs, or alcohol. So you might find people starting to drink earlier in the day or using alcohol as a bit of an aid to help with their stress, which we know is not very effective. And emotional outbursts. So if someone perhaps reacts really, really strongly to something that you wouldn't have thought that they would feel that strongly about, that can be a trigger as well. Or people might be yelling more. I know my friend always talks about her poor dogs, that when she's particularly stressed, the dogs get called lots of different names under the sun, and they're not actually doing anything wrong, but it's just she's obviously in acute period of stress at that time, and that's something that she knows is a bit of a trigger for her. So lots of different ways, and you're not expected to diagnose or necessarily do anything about them, but just identifying that some of these things together might be indicating that someone's not traveling that well. I'll just pop another little short clip on now, and this is a really nice explanation of the way different people recover from, and it's based on natural disasters, but I think from any kind of stressors. So people recover very differently, and not everyone has the same kind of needs and will need the same things at the same time.
After a potentially traumatic event, individuals can be impacted in various ways and to different extents. And these differences can be apparent both in the short and longer term. Indeed, research suggests that, broadly speaking, there are 4 common trajectories of responses to trauma over time: resilient, recovery, delayed, and persistent. The good news is that after exposure to a potentially traumatic event, the majority of people will follow the resilient or recovery trajectories, and do so by drawing on their existing coping strategies and support networks. The first trajectory is resilience. People on this trajectory generally show transient and small declines in functioning following the event. For example, they might have a few nights of poor sleep or feel on edge for a while. Then they'll bounce back to their pre-trauma levels of functioning. The next trajectory is recovery. Individuals in the recovery category may display significant mental health problems, such as subclinical or diagnosable mental health disorders, as well as disruptions to functioning for several months before returning to pre-event levels. Individuals in the delayed category develop mental health issues a significant time after the trauma. They may have coped relatively well in the aftermath of the trauma, but then a change of circumstances might impact their ongoing ability to cope, and they find themselves experiencing symptoms relating to their original traumatic experience. This change could be triggered by, for example, experiencing another trauma, reducing reliance on other coping strategies such as alcohol, or a change in their employment status. And finally, the persistent or chronic category. These individuals develop more severe and persistent mental health problems, drug or alcohol-related problems, or persistent relationship and occupational difficulties. Individuals in the delayed and persistent categories will be in the minority. Research suggests, for example, that 1/4 of people who experience a disaster go on to develop a mental health disorder, and many of these will have pre-existing mental health disorders exacerbated by the trauma. For people in these categories, their existing coping strategies and supports may not be sufficient, so they may also need monitoring and referral to professional support. It's important to note that after the experience of trauma, individuals often report personal growth as a result of these traumatic experiences. This is known as post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth can be experienced alongside any one of these other trajectories. So, for example, even in the case of persistent post-traumatic symptoms, it's possible to learn and grow and develop new ways of understanding and being in the world. The specific role you have in supporting an individual after trauma will influence how you might apply this information. However, the key takeaway points are most people recover without needing professional support. We can't assume that everyone recovers in the same way or at the same pace, so people will need different types and levels of support at different times. This highlights the importance of monitoring an individual's reactions, functioning and coping over the weeks, months and years following a traumatic experience. You may or may not be in a role that allows you to monitor an individual's responses over time. If not, then your role might be to educate individuals about the importance of keeping an eye on their own and others' level of stress and ability to cope, and to recommend seeking professional assistance if any of these difficulties persist.
I think it's really interesting, and it always sticks out to me that like only 1 in 4 people will go on to develop a diagnosed mental illness. So only 25% actually need that psychological support. So it's really important, I think, when we're looking at in the next section about referring people on, thinking about all the different things that perhaps can be helpful. So like the rural financial counsellors, some feed budgeting support, some obviously perhaps a chat with AgVic about some support with some infrastructure. There's lots of different things that can help people. The other thing as well is that at the moment, while they're deep in the stress or the challenge, they might not be processing it, and they may not need that kind of psychological support at the moment, but that could be really, really helpful in 6 months down the track or 12 months down the track. So I know some examples from a project we worked on. They ran some workshops down in Gippsland, and they ran workshops around wellbeing, and people, they were sort of running them from the 2019 fires. So this was 2 or 3 years on. So they were sort of looking to support people following those fires. They know that people need support a couple of years later. what they actually found is that people were still talking about fires that happened 10 or 12 or 15 years prior to that as well. So people still weren't necessarily processing much further back. So even when they're focusing on something that they think was a relatively recent time, people are still actually processing trauma or processing information from a lot further away. And the same with the Ash Wednesday fires. Some research around that said that people were still processing, I think, 12 months on, 3 years on, and still ongoing from that. So it can be really, really different for different people how they process that trauma and when they need certain types of support. Some of the things you can do, so basic support, and these are things that anyone can do. Obviously, if you go out and visit someone and you're really concerned about them, they're in acute heightened state of stress, ensure their safety. So have a look around and ensure safety of perhaps if they've got kids or other family members as well. So looking at, particularly on farms, things like firearms, just making sure the environment's safe and that they're not doing anything unsafe in terms of operating machinery in an unsafe manner or something like that. Try and promote calm. So things like slowing down your voice, talking quietly, just really trying to calm the situation and calm yourself to calm them down. Ensure they've got the basics that they need. And this can be as simple as, making sure they've got tea bags to make a cup of tea, just to meet those simple basic things. Install hope, so try and look for something that they can look forward to, and this stuff is probably more in an acute like a really acute situation, but thinking of things that perhaps they might only look forward to for tomorrow, but just something to install some hope moving forward. Try and promote connectedness by talking about their family or local support networks. That might be friends or family, someone around them. Group efficacy, so that's all about kind of that social connection and having support of a group and connectedness. Promoting self-efficacy is about really them being able to help themselves, so giving them the tools or giving them suggestions of support that they can actually act on themselves, so something they've got control over and they can take control over that. Installing hope sometimes can just be about looking forward to tomorrow or looking forward to like really short-term things. It doesn't have to be big long-term goals. This is probably my favorite picture and then the easiest thing to remember. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in that ratio. So listen. People often just want to feel heard. So listening and really kind of listening to hear them and not listening to respond. Quite often we get stuck in listening, but we're actually thinking of our response while they're talking and we're not really taking in what they're saying. But just engage in conversation with them, ask them if there's anything they need, ask them what they're concerned about, and also validate them. And that's things like saying, oh, what I'm hearing is that this dry season's being really, really challenging. You're finding it really hard to manage your water sources or something like that. And ask them, have you understood that correctly as well? So ask, and they'll continue talking. The main thing is people do want to feel heard and they want to feel validated. So just something like, I can imagine that is really, really hard for you. That can be really, really helpful. Also, don't make assumptions about what they need or how they're feeling. Actually ask them and listen for their response. And the same, so recognizing that it's very real. Here's just some examples. So I can see that the dry season's creating a lot of work for you. So I can see that, your stress is actually real. There's a real challenge here. Acknowledging or clarifying. So what I'm hearing, you're finding it difficult to keep up feed to the livestock as well as you're trying to harvest. Have I understood that correctly? So that's that clarifying. Have I understood what you're trying to tell me correctly? And then also get them to continue the conversation, because sometimes the thing that's causing them stress or is a challenge won't be the first thing they mention. It'll be the last thing. It's very common. The doctors will say that people will go in for a doctor's appointment. The really big, serious, major health thing, they'll kind of mention at the end as they're running out the door. So they talk about other things first. So really giving them chance to have that conversation. So something that, you know, putting in new water infrastructure for your stock sounds really complicated. Can you tell me a bit more about that? So opening up that conversation to keep them going. The other thing that's really, really helpful for reducing stress, and something you can perhaps have a bit of an influence on, is giving them a choice of decisions. And this is challenging when people aren't thinking clearly, because they can struggle to make decisions, but giving them a couple of options. So if you're giving them advice on something, giving them a couple of different options, giving them a sense of control. So it's our perceived lack of control over situations that causes a lot of stress. And that's really common, like with farmers working in lots of different things out of their control, like the weather, commodity prices, other family members, all sorts of different things. So giving them back some sense of control, or helping them to plan for something that's coming up that can get a bit of control back for them, can be really helpful. And reducing demand, so kind of planning ahead and going back to the bare minimum of what actually needs to happen in that immediate sense. So that can be really, really helpful. I think I'll skip this one because it's another video, but we're just running a bit short of time, so I'll skip on to the next one. The other thing to do, so once you've identified that someone might be feeling stressed, you've kind of got out of, given them some time, you've allowed them to respond, you've had a conversation, then you're not expected to be their counsellor, but what you can do is know some resources, know some social supports that might be helpful for them, suggest those and refer them on to other services. And that's something, you know, whether rural financial counsellors or like someone that can plan some feed budgeting or something, can be really, really helpful there. So different sources of support might be personal support. So is there a family member, a friend, someone else that they can look to for some support? You might suggest that they re-engage in some social support if they're just feeling a bit isolated or challenged. There's your formal support networks. So as I said, the rural financial counsellors, rural aid are really, really good. The GP is a challenging one, I think, at the moment, because it's really tricky to get in with a GP. So there might be some other different supports there. And then obviously if they're in crisis, there's the general wellbeing lines like Lifeline, Beyond Blue, Men's Line. I have had people say to me that they'd much rather people refer to local services, and that helps that continuity of care and being connected. So referring into their local GP or their local mental health service or something like that is often a lot more effective. And all of these can be remote or face-to-face. Some of the wellbeing resources that we have that you might like to suggest are, we have the Managing Stress on Farm booklet that is sort of a self-helpy kind of work through booklet, the Steering Straight plan, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, the Campfire podcasts. So there's a series of podcasts talking about work-related risks to mental health, and there's lots of different topics, lots of different industry experts, all sorts of different people, so farmers, consultants, psychologists, people talking about different ways that people can manage risks to mental health on their farms. And that can be quite a nice one, because we know people have often got a lot of time traveling, a lot of time in the vehicle, so they can pop on a podcast and have a listen there. Rural Health Connect is a nice network for online psychology services if someone's actually looking for a psychologist, and especially if they can't get into their GP or anything. And TX, so this is a conversation starter, it stands for. That's a really, really good blue-collar worker phone counselling service. So there's just a mobile number. People can ring up, get a counselling session straight away. They can either ring the number or text. So if they're not really feeling that comfortable ringing, and quite often people will go from having that first initial text conversation and then going into to phone support after that. So that's free as well. That also doesn't need a GP mental health care plan or anything. They can get up to 8 sessions with the same counsellor with no barriers. So that's a really good one if anyone's ever looking for that kind of support to suggest, or for yourselves. Now, the bit I think is really, really important working in this space is reflecting on how working with people that are finding the season stressful, how that's impacting on you, and also thinking about everything else that you've got going on as well. So, in a fire affected area, whether you're working on a farm or not, you still have that whole impact of what's happening in the community as well. So I think it's really, really important to look at emphasizing your self-care first. Obviously, when you fly, the first thing they tell you is put your own oxygen mask on first before you help someone else. And I really like that analogy, just to keep thinking back to. The other thing is, it's a concept called compassion fatigue. So working with people that are stressed or in distress, eventually, if you're not careful, you can actually take on that emotional load yourself. So trying to kind of have compassion and empathize with them, but not taking on that load fully yourself, or not completely disconnecting. So it's quite a challenging thing to try and do, but if a bit of practice, and you can start trying to kind of bring yourself to the center and have that compassion for them, but not end up taking that on yourself. So there's really simple things you can do, but some of the things you can do in the background to make sure that you are keeping yourself on track, looking at your nutrition. And I think we're sort of familiar with the gut brain axis and how what we eat affects our mind as well as our body. Looking at getting enough water. Sometimes, fatigue and exhaustion can just be dehydration. So really focusing on your simple factors and having a balanced diet and watching how much you are drinking. Sleep, and that's the quality of sleep as well as the quantity. So you might be getting 8 hours of sleep a night, but you're actually getting broken sleep, and that's quite unhelpful as well. So focusing on some of your sleep hygiene things, getting some exercise, so getting out in the fresh air, getting some movement, some vitamin D. Looking at, and often this bottom line, these are the things that drop off when we start getting stressed. So your hobbies, making sure you're still doing the things that bolster you. So thinking back to that seesaw, keeping up those resources. So when your challenges get bigger, you're actually bolstering that with more resources as well. So maintaining your hobbies and by yourself and with other people, depending on how you want to do it. I always like this one about home, because sometimes the thing that helps the most isn't going off and doing all these lavish activities, but it's actually just getting things in order at home. So mowing the lawn, getting some paperwork done that you haven't done, tidying out a cupboard in the kitchen or clearing off your work services. Some of those things can be really helpful because you're constantly seeing all that stuff and you're thinking about all these things that you need to do, and just getting that ticked off on your list can actually free your mind up a little bit too. So self-care, I think, doesn't have to be all chocolates and massages. It can be really practical things. And make sure you've got that connection. So we as humans, we are social creatures. Everyone's level of connection varies, but making sure you've got some connection, and whether it's with your friends, family, partner. I love hanging out with my dogs as well at home, so that can be really rewarding as well. So just making sure you're connecting in. And boundaries is probably the other important thing. So depending on how you work, whether you've got work phones, emails on your phone, things like that, being conscious of how you're managing that, whether you're having interactions after work. Obviously in small communities, you can be running into clients outside of hours. So finding ways to manage those interactions and actually having downtime and being able to switch off as well. And also be aware of what you're following on social media. So at the moment, especially the fires are quite prevalent. There's a lot of new information in your newsfeed about that. With social media, obviously, the more you look at it, the more it brings it up. So you can actually become quite overwhelmed with lots of negative information. The other thing within your role is working out what is your role with supporting your clients, but also what isn't. And as I was saying, you're not expected to be a counsellor. You're not necessarily trained in that area. So really being clear, and that may be a conversation if you're in an organisation with your manager. What is your role and what are you expected to do, but also when do you pass that on, and when do you escalate any concerns, or when do you refer someone on? If you're a sole trader, which is quite often obviously consultants and people like that, who's in your support group that you can have these conversations with or that can help you? So is there like an organization or just someone else doing a similar role that you can actually have some of these conversations with? And knowing how to escalate any concerns if you're concerned for a client or finding a situation particularly stressful, how do you escalate that, whether that's within an organisation or outside? And so talking about the steering straight, I think this is a really nice plan. It's available to download on our website, and you can either, it can be something you can recommend to your clients, but it's also something you could use for yourself, and it fits really nicely with these recognize, respond, and refer. So the first page is really all about recognizing signs that you're not on track, you're getting a bit stressed, recognizing what your triggers are and writing them down. The other next 2 pages are about what are the things that you like doing, what are the things that make you feel better, what are the things that can reduce your stress, and that might be planning, setting out some goals, making some plans, writing down a list of things you enjoy, because often when you're stressed and in that that kind of heightened state, you can't think clearly, so you don't actually remember all the things that can actually be quite helpful. And what we know is that doing more of the things we enjoy can help bolster our mood and encourage us to do more. So those 2 pages, and then on the back it's really looking at who's in your support network, and that can be professional, personal, a bit of both. I think with agriculture and farming everything's so intertwined, but actually mapping out who's in your support network of finances, or someone like a technical consultant that you might be able to go and talk to about particular situations, counselling, psychological support, all sorts of other different things, friends and family. And having these things mapped out can be really good just to refer back to. And sometimes you might not even look back at it, but actually writing it out can be a really good way to retain information. So it's quite a nice exercise and quite a nice way to step through some of those things and embed some of those skills in the earlier slides. So I think we're nearly running out of time, but I think the key is just to acknowledge, like, it is really, really hard. Working with people that are in distress is hard. And then obviously in a small community, you are managing lots of other different stresses and wearing lots of different hats as well. So really thinking back to those 3 R's of and focusing in on that, perhaps making a bit of a plan, knowing your triggers. I always think too, someone else is really good to show you your triggers too, so they might be able to pick up on things that you do when you're stressed more so than you. So don't be afraid to ask someone close by. But and for you guys working with farmers, really focus on your own self-care as a priority, and then you're able to help someone else. And I think just be kind to yourself and don't be afraid to ask for help either. There's lots of resources and different bits and pieces out there. And I'll just pop up a couple of QR codes. So on our website, the wellbeing resources are all located in one spot, and Helen will circulate this to you as well. And then if you want to stay connected with us, you can receive our monthly e-news as well. So if there's any new resources or webinars or other different bits and pieces, that will go out in the e-news as well.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for everybody from National Centre for Farmer Health for your involvement in this. Thank you for participants. We had a great number along today. There'll be a fair few who will also be listening as well. And on behalf of Victorian Government and the drought support package that has supported this, thanks for your attendance and hope it's been helpful. And keep the communication lines well and truly open. And I'll pass on any information that's required. And Kelly, is this slide pack possibly also available as a PDF? If that was okay for you? Beautiful. Yep. We'll have that as well for people to see. Thank you, guys, and thank you for the rest of your day. And thanks, Kelly.